Hi, my name is Aaron. I'm 25 years old and I've been living in Ireland all my life. My parents are both from Dublin and we moved out of Dublin when I was 5 years old to the countryside in Drogheda. I have a degree in teaching and I am now studying to get a master's in social media. I don't really feel like I have a strong connection with the language. I didn't grow up speaking it at home. I didn't speak it around my friends. Even if I went to the local Gaelic team, we didn't speak it there. We had to speak and learn Irish in primary school and secondary school, but as you can imagine, trying to learn a language that is not spoken, is not used when writing, is not even used and is not even used to socialize with your peers, can be very difficult, as it's very hard to practice a language and learn to speak it and write it when it's only used for 40 minutes a day in school. I think this leads to a lot of Irish kids, especially in the modern generation, growing resentful towards the language because it's extremely difficult to learn and doesn't really benefit them once they leave school. Being fluent in Irish doesn't really benefit me if I want to travel abroad because no other countries speak it, and even at home it doesn't really benefit me because, as I said, most people in this country don't speak Irish. Growing up, I actually really disliked speaking the language and learning it because I found it extremely difficult to try and learn a language from scratch when I wasn't really being surrounded by it. Honestly, I think I would have had a better chance learning Spanish or French because I probably heard more of them words growing up than I would say Irish. Don't get me wrong, there are still some very patriotic people, especially in the west of Ireland, in the Gaeltacht areas, that love to speak Irish and are fluent. And there are still parts of this country that speak Irish over English, especially in the west. But like I mentioned earlier, what tends to happen is people from the west of Ireland that are native Irish speakers will have to move to Dublin in order to get good jobs, etc. And once they come to Dublin, the only language that is really spoken is English, so a lot of them lose kind of the culture and the language that they've grown up with back home in the west. And once they travel over to the likes of Dublin and other surrounding areas, they're kind of integrated in with a society that doesn't speak Irish, doesn't listen to traditional Irish music, and stuff like that. You know, we don't even really have a sense of Irish fashion. You know, there is stuff like Irish dancing that a lot of kids will participate in growing up, and it's a great way to make friends. But again, that's seen as a very small group of people that will take part in those activities. My parents also didn't grow up speaking Irish in their house. Neither of my grandparents spoke Irish, and from my knowledge, I don't think either of my great-grandparents spoke any Irish. So as you can imagine, throughout them 100 or so years we are talking about, there hasn't been much Irish being spoken in my family, and it was very difficult to learn a language by myself and through school. I feel like Ireland is at a stage now in this multicultural society where you don't really need to speak Irish to feel like you're a part of the country. Like I've been mentioning throughout, Ireland is such a big, vast country with many nationalities in it, and we are part of Europe, so we are integrated in a society where we are introduced to so many different cultures and languages, and it is bad that we don't bring forward our own traditions and appreciate our language, our traditional music. But I just feel like it has gone on for too long, that it is very hard for the modern generation of Irish people to look back and kind of revive that passion for the Irish culture and language. I feel like it's too far gone. It probably there should have been initiatives set up going back to the 50s and 60s to encourage more people to speak Irish and to kind of reinvigorate the language and the culture. But we're in the 2020s now. I would rather learn French, Spanish, Japanese instead of Irish, because them languages can benefit me if I want to travel and get jobs in the European Union and that, or other European countries. The language is too far gone now that it almost seems like it hinders a lot of kids. Kids need to learn stuff like maths, geography, and to try and force them to learn a language that they're never going to use. It's really hard to reason with a kid as to why they should learn Irish, and I think in another 10, 15, 20 years there is going to be less and less people speaking Irish. The Gael-talked areas are decreasing at an alarming rate, and there isn't being much done by the government and people that can make a change to actually try and help this situation. There is no initiative for us to speak Irish. There's no support really. A lot of Irish teachers that you'll meet in schools are actually from the west of Ireland, and they've made it their job to travel over to the east and try and spread the language, but it just hasn't worked. And there definitely needs to be something done at a higher level, but I think personally it's too far gone, and we will probably never go back to a very nationalist and patriotic country, in my opinion.
The reasons which you mentioned for not speaking Irish are very practical ones, that it's not mainstream here, it's more convenient to learn other languages. Aren't there any symbolical reasons, you need to learn the language because it's your mother language? That there's no country without a language. There's no nation without its own language.
I do agree with those points, and obviously I can't speak for every Irish person my age, but I just don't feel a sense of attachment to our language, especially our language. Like I said, I do enjoy listening to traditional music with my father, on occasions like Christmases and birthdays. Even when we're having family gatherings, we will put on some rebel music and traditional Irish music from the Dubliners and that. But outside of that, I don't really feel a need to learn Irish. I feel like life is too short, and if I want to learn stuff that I only really have time to learn stuff that's going to benefit me and the way the world is at the moment, that's going to be languages like German, French, Spanish. Even computer coding is probably more beneficial as a language than Irish. And again, I can't speak for everyone, and I know there are people in this country that would be appalled to hear me say that, because there is still parts of this country that have that are very prideful and want to keep the language alive. But it is just very hard to, when the policies and the government aren't really supporting them, it's very hard for them to be the majority voice in this country when most of us, we only ever speak English. You'd nearly have to pay me to go back now and relearn Irish, because it would just be that hard and time consuming. it's also very hard to teach people a language when no one speaks it. Like, the language is dying out, less and less people are speaking it. Certain phrases in Irish won't carry on if it's not being passed down, you know, certain slang words. Like, who is going to spread them if the language keeps on dying? Because if people in the west of Ireland aren't spreading the language and the vocabulary and the grammar, it's going to be even harder for us to learn it when we don't understand the basic rules of our language, and all of that is going to be lost over time. And, you know, like I said, if there was a push from the government and there was an incentive, you know, maybe a while back in Irish secondary schools for our final exams, there was a big push from the government to get more people to sit the highest level of maths. So they decided to give any Irish kid that was sitting higher level maths an additional 25 points for their final score if they sat the higher level of maths, which, as you can imagine, would push a lot of kids to try and study the highest level of maths that they could, because they were going to get extra points for doing it. But it's strange to me that this sort of additional benefit hasn't been added to kids that sit Irish, sit higher level Irish, that do really well in Irish. Like, why are they rewarding kids for getting good grades in maths and not Irish when they know that the language is dying and nobody is speaking it? So it feels like even the people at the top of this country understand that there isn't much they can do to keep the language alive, because if there was, they could easily implement a system where, you know, kids that spoke Irish in college got additional funds, or maybe set up more societies and clubs that speak Irish, or even just give kids more points in their final exams for sitting the highest level of Irish. You know, there doesn't seem to be a great sense of pride at the top when it comes to our language, and it's definitely something that they've struggled to keep alive, in my opinion. You know, like, I look at other countries and I meet people from all over the world, and they've such a pride in their language, and they can speak it so well and so fluently, and their English is impeccable. And, you know, you look at an Irish person and we can only really speak English. So I think, as much as we are a well-educated country, we are behind other European countries like Spain, like France, like Germany, because a lot of their population have 2, possibly even 3 languages, maybe even 4. And most Irish people can only speak English and maybe little bits of pieces of Irish. You know, we might be able to tell you what a cat is in Irish, but or what a dog is, but we couldn't go to a restaurant and order food in Irish. We couldn't give you directions in Irish. Like I said, I studied Spanish in secondary school, and for the 2 years I spoke Spanish in secondary school, I could probably go to Spain and order food in Spanish in the space of 2 years of learning the language than I could if I was asked to go to a restaurant and order in Irish. And I've been forced to learn Irish for the last 16 years of my life. So that will just tell you, like, how difficult the language is to speak, and how it's not a very practical language to learn anymore.
In my home country, Lithuania, there was historically a period, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when the Lithuanian language was lost. It was made mostly the peasant language, but the middle class, the ruling class, even though they didn't speak Lithuanian, they spoke different languages. They still considered themselves to be Lithuanians at that time. Do you still think it's, after all, possible to be Irish by not speaking the Irish language?
Yeah, I think Ireland is such a small country, and we're a country that has always emigrated, you know. Like, there is an Irish person in every part of the world nowadays with their own families, and a lot of them do still hold a strong sense of attachment to our country. You know, the Emerald Isle, as it's often called, there is still a very strong sense of passion and pride for the country. I just think that a lot of people have separated language from country, you know. For me, being Irish doesn't mean I can speak the language. For me, being Irish is I was, you know, born here, reared here. I know our traditions, I know our culture. Just because I don't speak the language doesn't mean I'm any less Irish than someone that does speak it, and like you mentioned there in Lithuania, there still is, in my opinion, a stigma, and it's kind of been there since as long as England has occupied the country, that Ireland is a peasant language. Like I've mentioned a lot throughout this, that a lot of the parts of Ireland that actually speak Irish are in the West, and the West is always seen as the poor country, the poor part of Ireland. They don't have the transport, they don't have the internet, they don't have the businesses. It's kind of stereotypical that a lot of them would be farmers, and they're the more traditional side of this country, and they are the ones that speak Irish. So there's almost that kind of stigma that a lot of Irish speaking people are kind of cultures and people that live in the west of Ireland. So I guess it is kind of still seen as a peasant language, because it's not really used in commerce, it's not used in Europe. It's I couldn't go into a shop and order a phone using Irish. So it is kind of a language that just isn't really used, and there is no practical way to use it. So it is almost like a peasant language that well, like I mentioned, I honestly see a very dark future for the Irish language, especially the language. I think our culture will live on, and it is easier to kind of spread our culture when the likes of the music and the Irish dancing is still very much integrated in our society. I can't, the instruments we play, the traditional Irish instruments and the folklore, that they will hopefully carry on. But the language, I feel that, it is year by year, it's only the people that speak the language are only shrinking. There is no real support, there's no real incentive or initiative for people to actually pick up and learn the language. A lot of people in the West, like I said, have to move to Dublin, and they probably lose that kind of sense of culture, and they probably end up speaking the language less. So I honestly can't imagine, unless there is some divine intervention from the higher ups, that they implement rules and stuff. But I definitely feel like it's gone on too long now. Like, I think off the top of my head, you're looking at nearly 80 years ago, at least in my family, the last time people spoke Irish to one another at home and that. So I think even in 20 years from now, if my kid asked me to help them with their Irish homework, I probably wouldn't even be able to, because it's just not something I'm surrounded by. I don't speak it, I don't read it, I don't write it. So I might know how to say what a dog is in Irish now, but 20 years from now, maybe I'll forget it. Maybe I'll lose the grammar. I'll forget how to write certain words and how to structure sentences, and it is quite sad. But we do have to be practical, and I'm not going to force my kids to learn a language that's not going to benefit them if they want to learn it. And if my kids are very intrigued by the traditional Irish kind of language and culture, of course I'll allow them to study it and join Irish dancing or learn Irish instruments. I'm not going to stop them, but I just can't see it happening, I guess, because it's not really how I grew up. I wasn't forced to learn any of the Irish instruments or do Irish dancing or anything. So yeah, I honestly do really want the language to survive. I don't want to completely lose the language. I do hope the government maybe get involved, or there is some way to keep it alive, and spread it throughout the country. I just don't see it happening. I am worried, because, like I said, kids already kind of have a resentment towards school, and no kid really enjoys going to school. So if you're going to force these kids to learn a language like Irish that they don't speak at home, don't speak with their friends, don't see they don't even see it online on the internet, they don't write it or read it. So I think there is a lot of resentment there, and I know I kind of resent the language a bit, so that probably has skewed my opinion on all of this. But you know, I would like to, maybe if the government made it so Irish wasn't mandatory and that it was kind of an optional, maybe if it was an optional language for people to study in school, you know, the kids that wanted to study it could study it, and then it would keep their passions alive and it would keep them passionate in the language, and the people that didn't want to speak the language could study another language maybe, and then you would, you know, keep people that are interested in the language interested in it, and the ones that don't want to partake in learning the language wouldn't have to. And you know, if I was given the option in school not to learn Irish, I probably wouldn't have. And I think that's why I do have a resentment towards it. And you know, just things like that, and just give kids the option to learn the language. There's also, like I mentioned a while ago, there is some traditional sayings that are kind of used as Irish slang. So there's a very famous phrase that you learn in sixth year, when you're learning to write essays in Irish. The sentence is win na muica, which basically means on the pig's back. Which, if you translate it to English, it makes very little sense. But to, you know, Irish people, if you're kind of saying like on the pig's back, it means, you know, like excitement, kind of, you know, you're happy, which is very strange, because if you think on the pig's back, it doesn't really seem like it would be used for saying like excited or happy. But Rinumika means on the pig's back, and kind of would be like a fancy way of saying that like I'm excited, or like happy days is another kind of Irish thing.